Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series. When we last left our intrepid party, they were trapped in the Oozing Temple. They had met an intelligent gelatinous cube named Glabagool, who they were calling Glob for short, and they were trapped in this temple because of an earthquake. And it was the earthquake that opened up the entrance for them to even get in there, but it also trapped them in there. And the water was rising. You had 10 feet ceilings. The water was up to 4 feet, and the air was running out. And they were running around trying to figure out what to do. And they had just figured out basically that, hey, we've explored the whole thing. We don't see any obvious way out of here. So what do we do? So that's basically where it picked up at this past session. Things went in this session about like I wanted them to. I wanted them to get out and then either get to Neverlight Grove or get very close to Neverlight Grove. Now, it actually ended with them on the verge of Neverlight Grove, which is fine. I actually went and did more prep work than normal for Neverlight Grove, so I was ready if they went there. But there's quite a bit. Neverlight Grove will probably be at least 2 or 3 sessions, if not more. Depends on what they do. There's some quests they can undertake while they're there. But we'll get more into Neverlight Grove, which is very interesting in its own right. Every area so far in this adventure has been really cool. I had a comment, a viewer comment asking about, with the length of Out of the Abyss, should he be worried, or they, maybe it was, should they, we'll be gender non-specific, I suppose, be worried that their players might get bored with the setting due to the length. I don't think so. I mean, I was actually kind of worried about that going into Out of the Abyss. I was like, man, is it going to feel claustrophobic the whole time we're in here, and da-da-da-da, and it's just dark and madness, but it's been really cool. Kudos to Christopher Perkins and the other designers and writers and the D&D team on this one. So I haven't got bored with it at all, and I don't feel that my players have either. Each area they go into is unique enough that it keeps it interesting, and the Underdark, they really took pains to describe the ecology and oftentimes the beauty, even the deadly beauty of the Underdark. It's not just black caves. So anyway, so Neverlight Grove will be interesting. Another thing that I'll share that might be interesting to people curious how I do things as a DM. For the most part, when it comes to like classes, races, feats, all of that stuff, just to keep things simple and to keep things consistent with all the players, I just say if it's in the player's handbook, or if it's, in the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide, or if it's in one of the officially published 5e adventures or something, it's probably good. You're probably fine to do that when it comes to races. Even if I don't, I'm not a big like Dragonborn or Tiefling person. They just conflict with my Tolkien view of what D&D is when I cut my teeth on D&D back in the 80s. But that doesn't mean they're bad, and people enjoy playing them. So I mean, we have 2 or 3 Tieflings in this party. So point is, just to keep so that I'm not constantly having to go, well, I found this online, or I got this out of the DM's Guild, or I made up this feed, or I just, for the most part, I keep it to that. But I've always said, if somebody on a case by case basis, if somebody wants to make a case, I'll listen. And I had a player who never asks me for anything. I mean, played with them for well over a year now, the entire time this group's been together. And he's a great player. He helps out a lot. He shows up every time. He never, is disrupts the party or anything like that. And he hardly ever asks for anything. So he was the one that plays the blind thief. So I've been saying, well, you get disadvantage in combat, and they get advantage on you, but you get an inspiration per session right off the bat to help compensate for that, for the sheer audacity of playing a blind rogue. And it's led to some good role playing and some interesting situations. And we said that, he gets perception on hearing checks and stuff like that. So anyway, he brought me a feat that it didn't come from one of the official products. I don't even think it came from the DM's Guild. It was a printout of some third-party feat, and it was called blind fighting. And basically, it, as long as you could hear your opponent, I guess if there's not like a silent spell or something else, or they're being incredibly quiet, then the disadvantage to attack them and the advantage for them to hit you is nullified. I was fine with that. There was an additional part of the feat that said up to 30 feet you could just listen and identify where somebody's at exactly, and maybe even on a certain roll out to 60 feet. And that seemed a little unbalancing. So I said, well, I'm cool with you doing the first two parts of the feat, which are, like I said, it don't nullifies the disadvantage for you fighting if you can hear them, and their disadvantage for you to hear them, or your disadvantage to attack and their advantage to attack you. And he also, what he did was, because at 4th level he had taken instead of a feat, he had taken a Constitution modifier, upped his Constitution ability increase, and he said, look, can I get rid of that, lose the hit points, and take this feat? And I said, yeah, that's fine. I said, but let's lose that third part about you being able to like Daredevil, like identify where people are at around you and stuff like that. If that's how I read it anyway, it felt a little overbalanced since we're getting rid of advantage and disadvantage, which is pretty big. So I said, let's lose the ability increase at 4th level, swap it out for that, and then also I'm not going to give you inspiration by default every session anymore. And he was fine with that. So that's how I handled that. And then I looked at everybody. I said, okay, did y'all hear that? We talked. I said, it's a case-by-case basis. I said, just because, I'm doing that with this player doesn't necessarily mean that a custom feat you want to do is going to fly. And I think it's very important to stress that it's case-by-case. Because players are, well, you let so-and-so do it, and it's like, well, in my mind, in my reasoning, so-and-so's request is different from yours, or I may let yours fly. It just depends. But for the most part, I try to shy away from all that. One of the reasons I was happy to talk to this player was, like I said, they always show up. They never ask for anything. They're a good player. They're a good part of the group. So, yeah, subjectively, I was very inclined to listen. Whereas if it's somebody that's constantly asking me for stuff, constantly asking me for stuff, constantly asking me for stuff, I'd have probably been like, probably not. So, and I don't know, that's probably not fair, but human nature is what human nature is. So, if you're a player and not a DM and you're watching this, or if you're a player and a DM, it helps to be a productive member of the team, to, I guess, gain favor when you're asking for stuff from your DM or GM. That's just human nature. So, but I do try to be fair, and at least hear things out from people who ask stuff of me. Now, I did have one player that was continually starting to ask me for stuff, and they hit me up one time, and I was just like, no, it was just like constantly, it's like I'd opened a door. So, even then, I did go back and say, okay, tell me again what you want. Let me think about it, because I was a little bit too abrupt. I was like, no, and that's not nice. That's not respectful to the player. And that other person is a good team member too. They just ask for more custom stuff than the rest of the players for the most part. So anyway, all right, back to the Oozing Temple. They basically were to the point where they're like, okay, we either need to go back, because there was this room that had a lot of niches and some great oozes in stasis, that if you touched them, they would come out of stasis and attack. And there was also, they had the room where there was the cracks in the ceiling and water was pouring in. So they did some discussion, and they were pretty sure that one of those two rooms held the clue to get out. So they went back to the room that had like the fountain and the niches in the wall and or niches, and the busted statue and all that. And by this time the water's up, 4 or 5 feet. Everybody's basically in difficult terrain, if not swimming. And they searched that room, and I had told them that, there was the book description gives us, one of the niches has a little crack in it with a little bit extra water coming in. It's a red herring. There's nothing, you know, going on with that, but they searched that. They searched the fountain. Um, they did, a bunch of other stuff, and they finally concluded, you know, there's nothing in this room. Now, one of the characters was like, well, let's fight. Let's kill all the gray oozes, and maybe that'll open something up. Which, I have a cat attacking my Dungeons and Dragons thing. Cat. All right. So, um, anyway, uh, cat attack. I guess the cat got initiative and surprise on me. But anyway, so they were like, hey, maybe if we fight all the gray oozes, because they'd fought one last week and then left the others alone. They said if we fight all of them, maybe that'll change something. And me being the DM, I knew that wasn't the way to go. And I was actually hoping they wouldn't do that to slow things down. But uh, it's actually not a bad idea. In the great, why not, right? You got frozen gray oozes in stasis, but they're just there to be encountered. There's nothing special about them beyond that. But they literally were about to go do it, and one of the other characters like grabbed them by the ear and were like, "Don't do that." So they ended up not doing that. But again, that's not necessarily bad thinking. If you have no clue how to get out, that's you're poking and prodding and trying to figure stuff out. It's not necessarily a bad thought. So they finally decided, they did some other checking. They didn't want to mess with the other two hallways where they hadn't sprung traps because, they're reasonably certain correctly that there were more black puddings there. They checked out where the four hallways meet right before you go south to the room with all the niches. They kind of checked all that out. Nothing really there. So they finally said, look, we gotta go to this room where all the water is coming in. And that's the way out. So I was glad they narrowed it down there pretty quick. And they basically said, well, let's just chip away at the ceiling and see what we can make happen. So there was a character last week, one of my players, right when we were wrapping up, they were thinking out loud, what do we do? And he had said something like, well, maybe we need to go bust through the ceiling where the water's coming in. And after everything was said and done, I'm just mentioning this now because I don't want to forget to, I asked him point blank, I said, I'm not saying you read ahead, but that was a pretty good intuitive leap. I said, did you read ahead? And he said, no, I didn't. It just seemed like the way out. And I believed him. So I said, okay. And I gave him 100 experience points. So I look for every now and then characters or players will do something and I'll say, okay, take experience points, take experience points, take experience points. Because I thought that was a very good intuitive leap in thinking. Is 100 experience points too much to award? I don't know, but that's just kind of what I did on the spot. So what they did was they one of the characters took a big wig and got bigger and went up there with like a crowbar and a hammer and just started hammering away on the ceiling. And by the book, it just it collapses in. The water starts coming in more, and they hammered it all out, and the water comes in a lot. They were about 5 hours away from being all the way up, and I just said, okay, well, and we role played. It took about an hour for the water to completely, and maybe some people want to do it immediately. Just water gushes in, they swim out. But for whatever reason, that's how I did it. It doesn't really specifically say in the book. It just says, once the water it says it comes in stronger, and then once the water is full to the ceiling, then everything's equalized, and they can just swim out 30 feet, and they pop up basically in a lake, in a cavern that lets them continuing traveling in the Underdark. So that's what they did. There was a question last week from one of my players. There's some torch stalks that explode and do, I think, 1d6 fire damage. That's a fungus in the Underdark. And I looked that up, and it said that they burst into flaming spores. So I read that as like that's not actually explosive concussive. It's just they burst into all these flaming kind of spores and do fire damage. So that's how I ruled that. You may rule differently, and it may not even come up with your game. But I was asked, and I was like, well, that's a fair question, because it'd be kind of cool if they were like little grenades you could throw. But I didn't read it that there was any concussive force. It was just a flaming kind of. So anyway, because they had thought about throwing those up there and blowing up the ceiling. So anyway, they swam out, and one of the things they did is because Shushar, who is their Kuatoa fishman guide, who has, guiding them now that his village of Slubludop is completely thrashed by Demogorgon. Um, they tied rope to him because he's a great swimmer, and then they kind of all held onto it as a guide to follow him, which I thought was clever. Um, and then Spore, the little myconid sprout, was just kind of floating around. Every now and then I'll throw in some extra details for the NPCs to make it a little bit more interesting. To say, oh, what's Spore doing? And I was, oh, Spore's just kind of floating around. And so anyway, so they made it out, and they popped up, and I didn't make them do any swimming or athletics checks. I just said, you just kind of swim up, and there you are. And shore is fairly close, so they got on shore. So a couple of other things that I want to mention. There was some discussion of Glabagool. What do we do? And at one point they said, well, can he make like little pseudopods to like little Flintstone running to move faster? Or can he kind of make a little pseudopod propeller and go faster in the water? And honestly, I didn't know how to handle that, because it's almost like they're wanting to use Glob's flexibility, his gelatinous nature, almost like to make Green Lantern constructs or something. Or I kind of struggle with that. Like, I don't want to impair imagination, but it does state that a gelatinous cube's movement rate is 15 feet per round. So I guess it could use a dash action, and that could be its running. Maybe it would get exhausted after a little while. I don't know. But yeah, they wanted little pseudopods popping out of the bottom and running it like little legs, like I said, a little propeller and all that. So, and then they were like, hey, can we teach Glob to fight? Like, can we give it a sword or something, and it extends the pseudopod and swings it around? And again, I didn't know what to do. I kind of said, well, he could try. And then I had it kind of dissolve the sword it was holding, which I found out later was not gelatinous cubes dissolve living tissue, not metal and whatnot. So that's like black puddings and stuff. So I had to correct that later, but I thought it was a funny little moment. He's like this, and it's dissolves in its extended pseudopod. There was a lot of discussion and questions around Glob, which is to be expected. It's a very intriguing character. All around, gelatinous cubes are interesting, in my opinion, in and of themselves. This is a cube of gelatinous stuff that can kill you in a dungeon. Is one of my favorite monsters from way back. When I first heard it, it just totally captured my imagination. It's like got bones and coins and armor and stuff floating inside of it, and it can dissolve you and kill you. And I guess it's square usually, like cube, because it's usually in a dungeon hallway, I guess. So anyway, there was a lot of questions. They got into a discussion over ethics of teaching Glob to fight versus not teaching him, or teaching him not to fight, or should we take him with us or should we not? And that was I kind of stayed out of that and let them have that discussion. I think I mentioned last video there was a player that privately had concerns about that approached me. And most of the discussion and things they've seemed to have with Glob so far have been along the lines of, self-defense is okay, but you're not supposed to run around attacking just to attack, Now keep in mind that this hasn't even come up with Glob, Glabagool basically envelops living tissue and dissolves it to eat. So, and one of the characters when they got up on the surface was like trying to find some fungus to show Glob eat that. So I guess that'll sustain him. That's living tissue, I guess. Plants, I don't know, but there's small animals, fauna, flora, all that in the Underdark. So I guess unless I hear otherwise, that'll be enough. They did finally decide after they got to the shore, because Glob, it says right in the book that Glob will go up with them if they want him to. He splashes up, and I made this little, it was kind of a cube-shaped hollow depression in the water, splashed up and then came towards shore. Because in the water, he's practically invisible. You just see the water around him. And he came up on shore, and they did decide to take him with them. And I said, look, guys, I said, two things. I said, I'm not telling you to take him or not to take him. But you need to be aware of two things. One, his movement rate is 15 feet per round. So if you travel with him, you by default are going to be at a slow pace. Um, Now that has some added benefits of foraging is increased, and um, also it's easier to stealth while you travel. But you will be moving at a slower pace. Uh, and then also, he dissolves living tissue. So, keep that in mind. I don't think he has any control over that. If you touch him, or if he touches you, or if you're in a fight and you get pushed into him or something, he's going to dissolve you or start dissolving you. I don't think he can turn that on or off. It's just his biological nature as a magical beast. So, like I said, I stayed out of it. Me personally, if it was my group, I would not take Glob with me. Interesting character, but not a great NPC or party member. I think I would want to know where Glob is if I needed to go back and find him, but I don't think I would take him with me through the Underdark because he's going to slow you down. But that's me. If players want to do it, they can do it, and that's what they decided to do. So, other than that, what I did was I had another thing I had to deal with last night, player-wise. A player who used to be in the group a while back rejoined, and his brother had told me he's coming. I said, okay, cool. So I knew about it in advance. So I already decided as soon as they get out of the Oozing Temple, I'll work him in. And I told him when he showed up, I said, hey man, we're in the middle of this. It's an enclosed system. It's basically a trapped room, or they're trapped in a enclosed area. It doesn't, and they've already explored it. It doesn't make narrative sense. Although I could have said, boom, you're there. But narratively, I said it just doesn't make sense for you to be there right now. But as soon as they get out, and everyone's like, assuming we get out, then I'll introduce you. So the way I chose to do that was there are some random encounters that you start having the closer you get to the Neverlight Grove, and there's like a Vrock, which is a demon. Is it a Chasme? Chasme is like kind of the fly demon. There's some Nothics. There's some other stuff you can encounter. You can encounter fungus groves or fungus whatever that have creatures and different stuff in them. So I decided instead of rolling on that, I was going to have them encounter a Vrock. I thought that would be a fun fight. I thought they'd like to just fight something, more challenging than an ooze or a, whatever, pudding. Although black pudding is kind of challenging after, having to solve the puzzle of the Oozing Temple. So what I had was they were walking through the Underdark, headed towards Neverlight Grove. And by the way, Shushar can find Neverlight Grove for the most part. He's a good tracker. But Stool, the little myconid sprout, will start homing in on it. Like, I know it's that way. I know where home is. So between Shushar and Stool, I think I said sprout, between Stool, he's like, Shushar's like, we're close. We're like 2 or 3 hours. So they started heading that way. And there's another, if you don't have Stool and if you don't have Shushar, there's another myconid sprout that you can get in the Whirlstone tunnels. My party did not encounter that. There was a little bit of the Whirlstone tunnels. They didn't encounter the crazy Darrow that thinks he's a demon lord or a deity, Bupido. They didn't encounter him. And there's also an encounter where they can encounter some spore servants of Jubilex. And is it Jubilex? Or is it, no, it's not Jubilex. It's, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but the demon lord of fungus, demon lordette. Anyway, there's another myconid sprout you could have gotten in that encounter. And so between that, and it's like Rabadoop or something like that. He didn't encounter our party, or our party didn't encounter him. Shushar, and Stool can all get you to Neverlight Grove. Or I guess you could just narratively say after days of searching and this and that, and you managed to find it. Even though there's only one entrance. You can get to the area, but there's only one entrance to get in, which we'll talk more about next video. So anyway, the way I introduced the new player is a half-elf warlock. Man, this character, or this party, really needs some melee. They keep making, wizards and rangers and clerics and bards. They don't have any straight-up fighters. That's one thing I think this party's a bit lacking in, is instead of them talking with her, hey, what do we need? They're just like, oh, I'm just going to make this and throw it in there. So, and another interesting dynamic of the party, which was not by design either, is the majority, not the majority of players, but the majority of characters are female. I think out of like 8 players or something, 8 characters, there's 2 males that are actual players. So anyway, just how it is. And that's what, me personally, I don't want to play a female character. But I'm not saying it's bad if you do. That's never really been my thing. So, um, but anyway, there's actually a husband and wife that play in my group, and they both play female characters. What can you do? Okay, so I had the new player. They were kind of going through the Underdark, and all of a sudden they saw this dark figure just yelling and running straight at them, just "Rah!" And they're like, "Is it friendly?" I said, "I don't know." And they're like, "Ah!" And so I said, "It's just running at you and yelling, and it's yelling quite loudly, and just being all freaky." And they're like, "Oh, what do we do?" So they thought they would be clever and start yelling greetings. And I said, "Well, what language?" And one person said, "Well, I'm doing an undercommon." I said, "Okay." And then another person said, "Well, I'm doing common." And somebody said, "Well, I'm doing elf." And then I'm doing infernal, or what? I mean, just everybody just started throwing out all these languages. I said, "Okay, that's fine." Um, so I said, "You could do that." So they're all yelling greetings in all these different languages at this form running at them. Well, obviously it's the new player, and the new player is being chased by a Vrock. And so here's how I set it up. I said, "Okay, you," to the new player, I said, "You're running through the Underdark. You're being chased by a Vrock. You're near death." I said, "You got 5 hit points left. Um, you've been harassed and attacked by this Vrock. It seems to be playing with you, but it seems to be moving in for the kill. It keeps swooping down and attacking you. And a Vrock is a flying demon, very nasty." Um, and I said, "And you see in front of you, you see some lights, and you see what appears to be an adventuring party." And he's like, "Oh, head right for them." And I said, "They're all yelling at you, but you can't make anything out because it seem to be talking different languages and on top of each other." And the party's like, "Ah," but I did that. You're like, "Oh, we have a locked door," and 6 people suddenly say, well, I'm rolling. You're stacking the deck, right? You're stacking the odds. You're trying to beat the system and say, well, if you get 6 rolls in, somebody's going to, I don't allow that. I say 2 of y'all can roll. I don't allow every person one after another to roll, because that defeats the purpose of the challenge and the challenge rating and all that. Because by the odds, if you keep rolling, you're probably going to beat it. So if you, like, every party member, 8 different people start going, and yelling in a different language trying to cover the odds, I'm just going to work that against you. So, most common language is common. Try common first. That's just my opinion. So I had a little bit of fun with them, and they're like, okay, we get it. And but anyway, so he went running up, and it basically turned into, he's like, bad, 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 and they're like, what, and they can tell he's hurt, and they're trying to figure out it's a half elf warlock, and they can tell that he's kind of dressed in robes, they're kind of tattered. And I said, "Here's your backstory." I said, "You were an adventuring party." I said, "And let me know if this conflicts with your backstory," which it didn't. He was fine with it. I said, "Your party came into the Underdark looking for fame, fortune, adventure, and you've been decimated. And you've been lost, and you've been roaming, and you've been, trying to survive. And this Vrock found you and was about to kill you, and here you are." So he's like, "Sweet," he doesn't know if these characters are evil, good, whatever. The character does, and the player does. And the character's like, what's going on? But he doesn't appear to be a threat. And then I had the Vrock show up and just boom, land. And it was a fun fight. Vrocks are pretty. They're CR6. It's pretty challenging. I had him do his screech that stuns people. I had him do his emitting of his spores that causes poison. He's biting, thrashing. There was a tiefling monk in him, got into a little bit of smack talk over who's more infernal and all this stuff. It was a fun fight. So anyway, they defeated the Vrock, which was a bit challenging. I thought the Vrock was pretty fun to run as a monster. They did all their introductions. They integrated the new guy into the group, And then, they're heading to Neverlight Grove, and that's where we stopped. So in the next session, we should basically be at Neverlight Grove, which again is an interesting area with some interesting NPCs and quests and an overall, nowhere safe in the Underdark, especially with the demon lords on the rise. Um, Nowhere is completely safe. So it's an interesting area. So make sure to tune in next video to hear more about how that goes. But anyway, I welcome your questions, comments. Um, Been getting more and more of those lately. Please keep sending them. I enjoy answering them and reading people's perspectives. Please leave this video a thumbs up on YouTube. That helps me a lot. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, and we will catch you next time on Shane Plays.